Annyeong! I am Jarina Si Ayai. I've been featuring about the history of Seoul, Korea.
Welcome to Seoul, the capital of the Republic of South Korea. For decades, the city known as the Miracle of the Han kept its head down, barely raising a ripple as the country rebuilt in the decades following the Korean War.
Even though we have archaeological evidence that people have been living in the area now known as Seoul since prehistoric times, there was no historical mention of any settlement there until the 1st century AD, when the settlement was at the meeting point of the ancient three kingdoms. Despite the fact that it had existed for many centuries, the area of modern-day Seoul was quite small until 1068 CE, when a king built a summer palace there. After that, through the next 3 centuries, Seoul gradually grew into a fairly large city and was made the capital of the Joseon dynasty. The Joseon dynasty was incredibly cautious about protection because for centuries the Korean peninsula had weathered many attacks from both China and Japan. They cared so deeply about protecting the Korean people and culture that they closed the country to foreigners and even built their own Great Wall. During the time Seoul was the capital of Joseon, it went by the name of Hanseong, which means fortress city on the Han River. They gave it that name because in 1396 they started construction of the fortress wall of Seoul, which stretched over 18 kilometers and had a 6-meter fortress in order to help protect the city from foreign invasion. After the Joseon dynasty fell in 1897, the Korean Empire took over and kept Seoul as the capital. It was under the Korean Empire that Seoul was open to the outside world and was able to modernize fast. In less than 10 years, they became the first East Asian city to have things like trolley cars, electricity, telephone, and water systems all at the same time. However, the prosperity experienced under the Korean Empire was very short-lived. You see, in 1910, Seoul was formally annexed by Japan, which gave them complete control over the city. The Japanese used Seoul as the capital of their colonial rule, and they imported even more modern technology. They paved roads, took down old walls and gates, and built Western-style skyscrapers. The Korean people were incredibly unhappy about being subjugated by Japan because they were treated very poorly. Luckily, Japan left Korea for good at the end of World War II, which was a very special day for the Korean people that's still an important national holiday to this day. However, the problems didn't stop there. You see, during the time Japan was in charge, Korea became fundamentally divided as the North started to embrace communist ideologies and the South didn't. So when the Japanese left, the two halves of Korea became physically divided into 2 different states, with Seoul becoming the capital of capitalist South Korea. The government of the newly founded North Korea wasn't happy about the divide and they wanted to hold power over the entire peninsula. So in 1950, they invaded and captured Seoul, sparking the Korean War. During the 3 years the war went on, Seoul changed hands between North and South Korea a total of 4 times, and all that conflict and fighting left the city in ruins after the war ended. It's estimated that a total of 190,000 buildings, 50,000 houses, and over 1,000 factories were destroyed in the war. Not only that, but Seoul had a large number of refugees coming into the city from the north, growing the population to 2.5 million, more than half of which were homeless. It remained the capital of South Korea and became the focus of a major reconstruction and modernization campaign starting in the 1960s. Because of that, in just a few short decades, Seoul went from a relatively small city decimated by war to having the 3rd largest metropolitan area in the world and a nominal GDP of over $380 billion, which is higher than the entire. Today, Seoul is still one of the most prosperous cities in Asia, as its people enjoy GDP per capita of around $40,000 per year. Seoul is also a global leader in all things technology and is home to 15 Fortune 500 companies including Samsung, LG, and Hyundai. But even though it's such a modern and technologically advanced city, it still holds on to the remnants of its past and has 5 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, 115 museums, as well as Confucian shrines, ancient Buddhist temples, and even a Catholic visit this beautiful ancient city every single year.
According to the data of Ministry of Environment, in 2014, Korea was decreased forest by 2.1%, farmland by 15.9%, and tidal floods by 20.4% over the past 20 years. The environment of Korea is natural environment of Korean Peninsula. Some environmental conditions are relatively uniform throughout Korea, while the others differ by region, and particularly between the peninsula's two countries, the North and the South. The government consists of Seoul of Metropolitan Government, which is the executive branch, and the Seoul of Metropolitan Council, the legislative body, and the administrative structure contains three tribes: Si for the city, Go for the district, and Dong for neighborhood, literally the village. The South Korea military is ranked as 16th most powerful military forces on the planet as of 2020.
Today, Seoul has re-emerged as an economic powerhouse and the epicenter of Hallyu, a Korean wave of culture that is sweeping the world's smartphones, food halls, and dance floors. But Seoul wasn't always so outgoing. In the 14th century, a 12-mile fortress wall encircled Korea's ancient capital. Its gates closed each night to keep marauding Siberian tigers and invaders at bay. Since then, the city has spilled out far beyond and above its great city gates and guardian mountains. 21st century Seoul is a city where glass and steel towers and the ancient curves of palace roofs coexist. It's a city where the brushstrokes of the past and contemporary public art tell stories of tradition and inspiration. Coming to grips with Seoul's incredible size and sweeping narrative can be a little daunting. So start your adventure at the K-Style Hub, a state-of-the-art visitor center where South Korea's past, present, and future converge. From the latest in K-pop to its timeless national parks. From the cutting edge of K-design to culinary traditions which have taken centuries to perfect. And while you're here, why not slip into the traditional dress? Dressing up hanbok style doesn't just put you in touch with Korea's proud past, it also gives you free admission into many of Seoul's most revered historic places. At the head of Gwanghwamun Square sits the gleaming statue of Sejong the Great, the 15th century Joseon dynasty king whose reign oversaw a golden age of literature, science, and technology. The great leader sits before the grandest of Seoul's 5 royal palaces, Gyeongbokgung, the Palace of Shining Happiness, a residence of Joseon dynasty rulers. From the late 1300s until 1910, the palace has endured fires, invasion, and wars. Wander through the palace's ornate gates, pavilions, halls, and throne room, which, in accordance with Confucian principles, are perfectly balanced by the simplicity of the pine-covered mountain backdrop. Take a short bus or subway ride to the east to explore the adjoining palaces of Changdeokgung and Changgyeonggung, which are separated by a simple stone wall. In the tranquil confines of Changdeokgung's secret garden, sit for a while by the pond, where kings once paused from royal duties and dramas to write poetry beneath the ginkgo, walnut, and plum trees. To the south, at Doksugung Palace, see the changing of the guard, which takes place 3 times each day. Then explore the eclectic mix of palace buildings, such as the pavilion, where coffee-loving King Gojong enjoyed his daily cup, paving the way for his country's future caffeine obsession. Just to the west is the last of Seoul's great palaces, Gyeonghee-gung, a royal refuge in times of unrest. After exploring Seoul's vast temple complexes, see how government officials and ordinary Koreans once lived. At the Namsangol Hanok village, ancient buildings and traditions have been preserved in one of the most scenic and tranquil areas of Seoul. To see how Seoul's citizens furnished their homes, visit the Korea Furniture Museum in Songbuk-gu. Here, over 2,000 exquisite pieces of practical craftsmanship are displayed within 10 traditional houses. The story of Korean craftsmanship continues at the National Museum of Korea, which houses national treasures such as the 10-story pagoda and priceless white porcelain from the Joseon era. But it's in Seoul's busy streets where the past and present really rub shoulders, and where the two Korean loves of shopping and food go hand in hand.
So today I'll be featuring all about the infrastructure, the demographics, and the culture in Seoul, Korea. Infrastructure. So first we have the transportation in Seoul, Korea. So Seoul has a modern and efficient system of public transportation that includes both subway trains and buses. Seoul has 9 major subway lines that run all throughout the city and even go into the suburbs and surrounding areas. It is a great system. The trains come both every 5 minutes and are clean. Energy. South Korea consumed 12.66 quadrillion BTU of energy in 2017. This represents 2.17% of global energy consumption. South Korea produced 1.66 quadrillion BTU of energy, covering 13% of its annual energy consumption needs. Water supply and sanitation. So water is the source of all life. No life is possible without water. Only 50 years ago or so, Seoul had difficulty supplying water that is safe to drink. However, today, Seoul's water system, called Ariso, provides water that is higher in quality than recommended by the World Health Organization. As the world's first water system to be accredited by the host National Sanitation Foundation, it supplies safe to drink water to its citizens 24 hours. Demographics. So first we have the religion. So religion in South Korea is diverse. The majority of South Koreans is 56.1% as of the 2015 national census are irreligious. Protestantism represents 19.7% of the total population. The Korean Buddhism is 15.5% and the Catholicism is 7.9%. Languages. There is one official language spoken in South Korea, with five different dialects. Seoul dialect is the standard version that is used in speeches and used on news report. Some other commonly spoken languages in South Korea are English, Japanese, Chinese, and Russian. Education. Children between the ages of 6 and 15 are required to attend school in South Korea. There are 6 years of primary school, 3 years of lower secondary school, and 3 years of upper secondary school, which is either academic or vocational. Health. So the public health care in South Korea is not free, but it is reasonable and average resident only need to cover 20% of their medical treatments, which is typically just the copay of their service fee. If you are employed, 5% of your income will go towards the NHI. So now let's move on to the culture. So first we have the arts and architecture in Seoul, Korea. So I have here the example of the arts and architecture in Seoul, Korea is the Hanok. So Hanok are traditional one-story wooden homes insulated with wood and straw and topped with clay-tiled roofs, unlike the ostentatious manor homes of Europe. Even aristocrat lavish Hanok was designed to blend with nature. They're typically left unpainted, their brown and the tan earth tones giving off a warm, intimate feel. All rooms look onto a courtyard madang. Life was lived on the floor and people sat and sleep on the rather than chairs and beds. Literature and philosophy. So in South Korea, Korean literature is literature written or produced in South Korea following the division of the Korea into North and South in 1945. South Korean literature and philosophy is primarily written in Korean, though English loanwords are prevalent. Performing arts. So school in performing arts in Seoul is called SUPA. So SUPA was founded on March 6, 1966 as Jongyo School. On February 28, 2002, Park Jae-roon was appointed as principal. SUPA was relocated on September 1, 2008 to its current location at 147-1 Gundong Goroguin in Seoul. After changing its name to School of Performing Arts, Seoul SUPA took in their first batch of students on March 1, 2009. Customs and holidays. So first we have the Seollal. So it's the first day of the Korean lunar calendar and the most celebrated traditional holiday in Korea. So next we have the Dano or the Spring Festival. So on the fifth day on the fifth month of the lunar Korean calendar and involves a ritual in which people wish for a good harvest after planting crops. So next we had Sukyuk or the Korean Thanksgiving Day. So on the 15th day of August, according to the lunar calendar, and is also known as Gabae, Gawi o Hangawi or Jongchokjol. So next we have the Hansik or the Eating Cold Food Day. On the 105th day after Dongze, April 5 by the Hungarian calendar. So now let's go to the food in Seoul, Korea. The best food in Seoul, Korea. So first we have the Korean barbecue. Next we have the kalgukso, Korean knife cut noodle soup. Next we have the braised turtle fish stew or galse jorim. We have the mando or the Korean dumplings, the Korean pancakes, the kimbap or Korean sushi roll, or the samgyetang ginseng chicken soup. So, mass media in South Korea. So, the South Korean mass media consists of several different types of public communication of news, television, radio, cinema, newspaper, magazines, and internet-based website. Modern Korean journalism began after the opening of Korea in late 19th century. The Korean press had a strong reformist and nationalistic flavor from the beginning, but faced efforts on political control or outright censorship during most of the 20th century. So now, let's go to the sports in Seoul, Korea. So Seoul is a major center for sports in South Korea. Its professional sports teams compete in football. So we have the football or soccer. Next, we have the baseball, the basketball, and the volleyball. And that's all.